definition of investment infrastructure, and most of the rest was just keeping cops, teachers, and others working by sending a huge amount of money to the states. So there was 7% of that bill was really designed to put people back to work, create new jobs, and invest in the future of this country. And I stood up to Mr. Summers and I said, well, I studied economics, and I got to say, I think what you got here is bad economics and bad politics. Nobody knows they got it, and it's not going to put anybody back to work. We disagreed, but the point is, when we got to the last election, if you looked at the polls, everybody who earned less than $89,000 in the United States got a tax cut under the stimulus bill for 2 years, making work pay tax cuts. You polled those people, 80% of them said their taxes had gone up. They didn't know they're getting a tax cut. It didn't mean anything to them. And it certainly didn't put people back to work. So I'm tired of the tax cut stuff. And cutting now, in order to protect tax cuts, we're talking about cutting vital services. Instead of talking about a balance of revenue, we got into this whole debate over the debt ceiling limit, which is generally routine. It's about past spending. It's not about future spending. And it's about debts we owe, not debts we're going to incur. And to say the United States of America isn't good for its debts is a pretty dangerous thing. And luckily, nobody really believes that. In fact, right now, investors around the world are paying the U.S. government to hold their money for 3 months. You want a 3-month T-bill, you got to pay the government to take your money, which is negative interest rates, fairly extraordinary. So despite the furor of people and despite the criminals at S&P who downgraded us, the same people who rated junk on Wall Street as AAA, we're in pretty good shape that way. But we have to have a plan for the future. And it has to include revenues and prudent spending reductions. There's things that are pretty easy, and well, they're not easy, but should happen. And the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan saved $1 trillion over 10 years. Repeal Medicare Part D and give seniors a better benefit at much less cost. That is, repeal the law that says the government can't negotiate lower drug prices, which benefited the pharmaceutical industry tremendously. No one knows exactly. That bill was written by the pharmaceutical industry. They kind of were nice to the insurance industry, but not really, because, and no one knows this, it's a pretty technical part of the bill, but we have all those many dozens of health insurance plans selling these premiums. The reason there's so many is because the bill not only prohibited the government from negotiating lower drug prices, the pharmaceutical industry didn't want any insurance plan to get too many seniors in it, so they limited the size of any of those plans to, I think it was either 5 or 7% of the seniors, so they couldn't have too much bargaining power. So it was really written by and for the pharmaceutical industry, secondarily insurance, and then seniors were an afterthought who got a donut hole. We could negotiate lower drug prices and say to seniors, okay, you get lower drug prices because you got a Medicare card. Now, if you want to buy this one simple plan that we're selling at cost, you can buy that for insurance. If you don't want that, you'll still get a discount. That would save, the first part of it is, if we negotiate lower drug prices, we save $23 billion a year for Medicare. If we do away with the private insurance and go to the one simple plan, that we're up to $40 billion a year for Medicare. That's real money. That could help stabilize Medicare. And then, the other thing, because I've had people go, well, you don't talk about entitlements. I'm happy to talk about entitlements. You want to save Social Security? Pretty simple. Social Security, and this is something that deeply disturbs me, until this year, I could come to this group and I could say, Social Security is not responsible for 1 penny of the debt or deficit. Can't say that anymore, because we have the Social Security tax holiday. So this year, $110 billion of the deficit is going into Social Security, borrowed money. I think that makes Social Security incredibly vulnerable, and again, I don't think it's effectively putting people back to work. But the point in talking about that is Social Security is the largest debt holder of the United States of America. They own almost $3 trillion of our debt. So, who contributed to Social Security, those who are on it, everybody, we own it. Yeah. And it has not created the debt or the deficit in any way. In fact, they're financing the debt and the deficit. We're financing it through Social Security. So, and people say, well, but after 2036, it won't be able to pay full benefits. And I said, you're right, but it's pretty easy to fix. You eliminate the cap on earnings, and you say people who earn over $106,800 will pay Social Security tax. Now what happens, and I've worked with the actuaries on this, I'm kind of an expert in Social Security, we would raise so much money by doing that we could lower the tax rate for everybody who earns less than $106,800 and stabilize Social Security as far as they will calculate, which is 75 years into the future. Okay, so let's take Social Security off the table. That was only one step on Medicare. There are other things we need to do to fix Medicare, but that's a good start, the prescription drug benefit. But then let's talk about where we're going to reduce federal spending. I already talked about the wars. That's $1 trillion, $110 billion a year. There are other places. You know, every agency of the federal government is audited every year, except for one. That would be the Pentagon. Because the last time the GAO tried to audit them, they said they're unauditable. They had $2 trillion of appropriations they couldn't reconcile with things delivered. $2 trillion. So they got to buy, and supposedly by 2005 they're supposed to get audited. Well, it comes 2005. The Republican Congress passed an exemption to the Pentagon. They're under an exemption. Well, this year, during the appropriations process, I managed to get an amendment through, working with a Republican from New Jersey, which the chairman of the committee didn't understand, which is good. Because it is, so the Pentagon has a statute that exempts it from being audited. And the Pentagon brass came in and testified last year and said, we think we can be audited by 2017 if you give us $300 or $400 billion to build accounting systems. And of course, between now and 2017, they're expected to spend $4 to $5 trillion. So, you know, it's kind of like not too acceptable to me. So, on an appropriations bill, you can't legislate. That's the rules of the House. So we figured out a way, but you can limit how money's spent. So we said no money can be spent to enforce the ban on auditing the Pentagon. So actually, in effect, we have set the Pentagon up for an audit next year unless the Senate changes it, which they probably will. But it's a start. And you're going to look across the whole budget and look for the savings, and you're also going to talk about revenues. I mean, you can't not talk about revenues if we're going to get back to a fiscal situation. And then the other thing is putting people to work. It's the last thing I talk about that. And then get to questions. If we had a 5% unemployment rate, almost unthinkable today, we're about 10 nominally, actually much higher, real unemployment. And I can say honestly that, in my opinion, the Congress this year has created this many jobs. You know, what's missing is investment. You know, we got to discriminate between spending money, consuming, giving tax breaks, consuming, and investing to put people back to work. If we, instead of, and I brought this up with Vice President Biden when he came down around trying to sell his budget deal to the caucus, I stood up and I said, look, you know, and he rolls his eyes and sees me get up because, you know, I got to talk about infrastructure and building things. But I said, you know, and we didn't know at that point, this was like 30 hours out or 24 hours out from the vote. We didn't know what was in the package at that point. We didn't know until the last day. But I said, so are your Social Security tax holiday in there? He said, no, but we're going to fight for that because that's jobs. And I said, well, how many jobs does that create? And I said, well, we borrowed $110 billion, right? He said, yeah. I said, what if next year we didn't borrow the money for the, you know, for Social Security, we canceled the tax break and just had those people who were working pay their Social Security tax because we're really concerned about the people who aren't working. And we took and borrowed $110 billion and we built things with it. Roads, bridges, highways, transit, rail. We fixed the dams on the Willamette River, which can only operate at 85% of capacity because the federal government doesn't have the money to fix the spillways. Yeah. By the way, just in case you didn't know that, you are downstream. Our jetties, you know, things like that. We could put 3.5 million people to work. And it's not just construction workers, it's engineers, it's up at Oregon Iron Works who's making streetcars, very sophisticated stuff, or it's American Bridge down in Reedsport with American Steel. We have the strongest Buy America requirements for transportation projects, much stronger than the Pentagon, who waives them all the time. We could put millions of people to work, and then that would, you know, get the economy started. So, well, that's true, but we can't do that. And I said, well, you can't do it because you're not trying. You know, I mean, yeah. They're now starting a huge fight because the Republicans don't want to continue the Social Security tax holiday, which actually was a Republican idea, it wasn't a Democratic idea, but now the Democrats, or at least some of them, have adopted it. And I'm just saying, no, let's do something more meaningful to put people back to work. So we have this Super Congress, 12 people named by the leadership. They have until November 23rd to figure out how to save $1.5 trillion out of the future deficit and debt. They can do it through revenues or cuts. The only problem with that is that 6 Republicans have signed a pledge to a guy named Grover Norquist that they will not raise any revenues even by closing the most egregious tax loopholes to help defray the deficit or debt in the United States. If a tax loophole is closed under his rules, and they've signed his pledge, that money has to be used to create another tax loophole or to lower tax rates. It can't be used for debt or deficit. So I'm pretty doubtful that we're going to get a balanced solution that has revenues and spending reductions, which means we go to the default option, which is December 23rd passes, Congress assembled, hasn't done anything. Then we get, a year from January, we get cuts 50% in what's called security, which is Pentagon, State Department, Homeland Security. They put veterans in there, which I don't think belong, and Coast Guard, or 50% on the general fund side and up to $120 billion out of Medicare. The theory of the people constructed this horrible thing is that the Democrats would be so scared of potential for Medicare cuts, the Republicans would be so scared of the potential for Pentagon cuts that they'll agree on something, but I don't think it's going to work. If it does work, it comes forward under extraordinary rules. No amendments are allowed, no changes whatsoever. Up or down vote, House or Senate, which is exactly the same procedure that's been used for NAFTA and all these wonderful free trade agreements over the years. No amendments allowed, and that's how they end up so bad. A number of us signed a letter last week saying we just like 4 simple things. We wrote to the leaders and we wrote to the committee. We'd like you to meet in public. Not too much to ask. This is 12 out of 535. We'd like to know what's going on too. I'd like to. Secondly, you have to disclose all contacts with lobbyists. You have to disclose all And the fourth being, if you do have a product, which I don't think they will, we have to have at least 72 hours to read it before you make us vote on it up or down. I don't think that's too much.